Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reinvention Show, the place where we come together to explore how can we not just survive the constant volatility and disruption of the modern world, but actually thrive in it. And of course, when we started the Reinvention Show, I could never imagine that it will be a show that we would broadcast in the middle of another violent conflict. It's not the first one and not the last one, but it feels particularly relevant today to speak about how can we all stay a beacon of hope and stay useful and preserve our ability to persevere. And that's the topic for today, because today we'll talk about leadership. But before we jump into leadership and bring the amazing guest speaker that I have for you today, can you tell me in the chat where are you joining me from? I'm still in the US. I hope you, wherever you're joining us from, are safe in every possible way. And let me know where you're joining us from, as we always have an incredibly international community. And today it will be all about leadership. And I will, while you're typing, share my point of view on leadership. As many times I'm asked when I work with corporations, when I work with organizations around the world, I'm asked, what can I do? I'm just a middle manager. I'm not a leader in this company. I truly believe leadership starts with every one of us. So if we start leading ourselves and give ourselves a permission to lead ourselves, that's the point of choice and power and strength that all of us have. So no matter what position in organization you have, or you're a freelancer, you're a consultant and coach, you are a leader, and whatever we mean when we say leadership will apply to you directly. I see Maria is here from Brazil. Welcome. Exactly the kind of energy that I need today, Maria, because you're always the source of optimism and hope. So very happy to see you here. Let me know also where you're joining me from, what is happening, what part of the world you're joining me from, as we are warming up to talk to you today about leadership. And it's my great pleasure to bring today a very special guest and have a conversation together with you. I will just say a few words about Todd. Todd Cherches is the CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball, which is an amazing, innovative New York City-based leadership development executive coaching firm. Todd has done amazing things, including being named as top 100 coaches in the world. He's been nominated for a distinguished award for Thinkers 50. He has done amazing work across the board on the topic of leadership and development of our internal capacity to lead, but also ability to engage others. And I'm very happy that Todd will be joining us today. Portugal is here. I see others here, and I'm excited to bring to stage our guest today, Todd Cherches. Todd, welcome.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Nadia. Great to be here with you. I love what you said about leading at every level because I once attended, I teach leadership at NYU, and I once attended a conference on leadership with people from all across the school, different schools. And there was one group that was all capital L leadership. Leadership is only if you're a VP or a CEO or president of something. And then I was in the other group of small L leadership, which starts with everyone's a leader. And we need to lead in order to succeed. So that's a big part of my philosophy and approach, is that you need to, even if you're just leading and managing your own life, you are a leader and manager. So all of these tools, tips, and techniques, and you mentioned, we talk about the mindset, tool set, and skill set. We need the mindset of a leader, the tools to lead, and then the skills to use those tools. So that's something that we want to talk about today, how we can use visual leadership to do all those things.
Absolutely. Before we talk about your latest book on visual leadership and the concept of visual leadership, let me ask you first the language and the question that I'm sure you hear all around yourself, and I definitely feel and hear in my neighborhood whenever I'm with companies, whenever I am teaching, speaking, writing, I'm asked nonstop, when will things get back to normal? When will things get back to normal? So tell us, Todd.
Well, unless there's some kind of time machine that I don't know about, I don't think we're going back anywhere. We're going forward. I work a lot in visual imagery and metaphor. So I keep saying that the train's left the station, the genie's out of the bottle, and the toothpaste is out of the tube. We're not putting it back in, right? So I know some of my clients, some of the leaders of organizations, they want to turn the calendar back to 2019 when things were simpler and more linear and more structured, but we're not going back, we're only going forward. So the challenge now is, how do we move forward from here? So that's one of the things that we need to just accept that reality and then say, all right, now what?
And I just want to thank you for this comments, as we still see some attempt to tell us that this is all temporary. And by all, I mean the age of constant disruption. And it's not about a particular nature of disruption. If it's not COVID, it will be a violent conflict. If it's not a conflict, it will be technology. If it's not technology, it will be our new employee expectations, who, as we were discussing before the show, simply have no interest anymore in sitting in the office for 8 hours or spending 4 hours a day getting to and from office. Whether it will be government regulation or some sort of natural disaster, it really doesn't matter what the disruption is. And sometimes it's actually a positive disruption, new technology. But that time, the time where all of these disruptions were once in 100 years event, or even once in 50 years event, or even once in 10 years event, that time is gone. This is now constant, very important part of our new world. And in this new world, leading self and leading others becomes essential skill, a skill that allows us to be the eye of the storm and to be useful and helpful to others. So I'm very, very happy that you are here. And let's dive into your work. Your latest book, Visual Leadership, has received amazing feedback. And I want you to share with our viewers, what is visual leadership and how can we get it? How can we get some visual leadership in our life?
Yeah, so visual leadership grew out of my years of working in, first of all, a lot of times people think I was a business major, but I was an English literature major with a concentration in Shakespeare and poetry. And my father always said to me, what are you going to do with majoring in poetry? Sit around under a tree and just rhyme. But, my background in literature has shaped a lot of my work in terms of storytelling, character. We are all the hero in our own life story, right? We need to lead people. We face barriers and obstacles. There's always a goal and a quest. So if you think about parallels to literature, there are many in terms of life and in terms of leadership. And then I worked in the TV industry for a number of years in advertising in New York and then in Hollywood for a number of TV production companies and networks. I worked for Disney, I worked for CBS. So again, my background in storytelling, entertainment, media, and literature shaped my approach to management, leadership development, and executive coaching and teaching, which is what I do today. So the idea behind visual leadership, and I'm just going to hold up the book for a second, is if you look at the spelling of the word, most people don't even realize it's a single shared capital L. So even when you see it, you don't notice it because we're not attuned to seeing things that we're not prepared to notice or familiar with, right? So the idea behind visual leadership as a single word, and a single word with a single shared capital L, is the concept that who you are and how you lead is inseparable from the lens through which you see the world. Our backgrounds, our upbringing, our education, our life experiences all shape what we see and what we notice and how we interpret things, but also what we miss, what we don't see things, right? So we come from very different backgrounds. So there's some areas of overlap, almost like a Venn diagram, but we also see the world through a different lens. And part of leadership is to see things from the lens of other people. So the rainbow colored eye on the cover, just as no one in the world has this color eye, no one in the world sees the world exactly as you do. So we need to, what I call, flip the lens, look internally at our biases, assumptions, belief systems, paradigms, but also try to see things from the lens of others with empathy and compassion and understanding, and then use all the colors of the rainbow to paint a better world. So those are just some of the, just from the book cover, those are some of the key concepts of what visual leadership is all about. And one other point before is that was backward looking, but forward looking, we all talk about being a visionary leader or having a leadership vision. It's all about seeing the future. It's all about picturing a better world. And then how do we make that better world in our head a reality, and how do we get people to see what we're saying? So those are some of the key concepts of what visual leadership is all about.
And I think it's so important that we have both looking back, looking in the present, and looking into the future, this idea of respecting and understanding that the point of view is always different, and we are looking at the situation from different sides. So I'll tell you a story that many of our audiences have heard from me because I share it during our Reinvention labs, but it's the story that is true story from my life, and my daughter gave me permission to share it now that she's an adult and she needs to give me permission to share it. But it's very much the story of seeing things from different point of view. So we spent 9 years living in Europe, and my daughter just turned 18, but when she was about 5, 6 was the first time when we took her to Venice. We lived only a 2-hour drive from Venice. We had a huge group of guests, business partners coming in from different parts of the world, and we spent the whole day walking in Venice. All of us are adults. She's the only child in the group. And at the end of the day, we sat down for some coffee and hot chocolate and went around the circle. What did you remember the most? What is your most vivid memory of Venice? And when it got to my daughter, Lila said, "But." And we were very surprised. We kept asking her in her child language, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, Mom, I'm this high. The streets are very narrow and there's a lot of people. What I've seen most of the day is butts of a person to me." And this is the reality of most situations in which we enter. I might be selling Venice, but my audience might be seeing butts. I might be walking around and showing to executives, to our clients, to our students, to whatever audience I'm speaking to, I'm showing them Venice.
Yeah.
But from their angle, from their point of view, from their experience, from their background, they're seeing something very, very different. And it's not that they're lying or they're unprofessional or they haven't developed enough. They quite literally have a different angle and different experience. So having visual leadership, having an ability to even imagine the point of view and the vantage point, and also having an ability to communicate in this very diverse world becomes so, so important.
Yeah.
Now,
I love that story because that's a great example of visual storytelling, because I am never going to forget it. Right? And it reminds us, can we see the world from a child's point of view? Can we see the world through the lens, in the spirit of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity? Can we see the world from the view of people who are not like us, who are not as privileged, or are not in a situation? So I think that's, to be a more empathetic, compassionate, and understanding leader, we have to see things from other people's perspective and realize that their experience is not our experience. So I love that story about your daughter. I'm never going to forget that.
And today, as we're looking at a very, very intense, diverse world with very intense experiences, it becomes so important, becomes more essential that before we react, and that moment between the kind of trigger and reaction, we have a pause where we allow ourselves and we ask ourselves to see things from different point of view. And that's why I want to ask for a pragmatic advice.
Yeah.
Most of our listeners have a moment that they invested in spending time with you and me. And after this, they're probably going to a business meeting, or maybe they're going to a client meeting, or maybe they have a team around them, or maybe they have a family member around them. What particular tip, advice, maybe insight, something that you think they can take away that will help them start building their visual leadership skills and start on this journey? As I, of course, understand it's not a one-day event. It's not something that you need practice, you need exercise, you need consistency. But how do they start on this path to building their visual leadership skills?
Sure. When people ask why are visuals so important, it's just that as human beings, we're just wired visually. We're wired to see things and take in information, but also not only take it in, but process it, interpret it, analyze it. And again, it's about being more aware. It's about noticing, looking, seeing. Thoreau, the author, wrote, "It's not what we look at, it's what we see." Right? So it's all about being more attuned and more aware to seeing. So in terms of practical, I break my visual leadership approach down to 4 categories. First is using visual imagery, which can include drawings or props. So for example, a few things on my desk. If I say, "Nadia, I'm really curious about something," My friend Curious George is going to remind me. So I keep this on my desk to always remember to ask why. Always be curious. Always dig deeper. My Gumby reminds me to be flexible, bend over backwards to serve my clients. So again, visuals don't have to be PowerPoint slides, or people will say, I can't draw. I say, even if you suffer from ICD, which is I can't draw syndrome, you could still, if you could play Pictionary and charades with your friends and family, you could get up at a whiteboard to do a napkin sketch and just illustrate something. If you can get an idea out of your head and onto paper or some other medium, it could be art, it could be sculpture, then people can see what you're saying, right? And I know one of the things we talked about earlier is you have your 9-box matrix tool, which I love. And that's an example of the second category in addition to the first. So the first category is visual imagery. The second category is mental models and frameworks. If you could, we always say we need to think outside the box, right? That's become a cliche, but you can't think outside the box until you have something inside the box, and you need a box, right? So using a tool like your 9-box matrix will help people to get ideas and take the complexity and messiness of the outside world, put things into categories, so then we could see them more clearly and then find solutions. So that's an example. So, it's a 4-box matrix like situational leadership or the time management matrix or Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, and we can put things into a structure, then we can find better solutions. Category 3 is using metaphors and analogies, saying something is like something else. And we use metaphors and analogies all the time, like saying something is the tip of the iceberg, right? We picture an iceberg. That represents what we see is just a small percentage versus what we don't see and what we don't know, right? So if we always remember, there's always more that we don't see and know than what we do. It's our job to dive beneath the surface, because otherwise, like the Titanic, we're going to hit that iceberg and we're going to be in trouble. So that's just one of a million different metaphors. And category 4 is using storytelling with bonus points for humor, because humor helps it stick when appropriate. So like your story about your daughter, I'm never going to forget that because it was visual. I pictured you in Venice, I pictured her, and I pictured, that response. And again, stories stick with us. So I always break it down into 3 categories, 3 reasons. And I mentioned this in my TED Talk on the power of visual thinking: attention, comprehension, and retention. When we use visual imagery or visual language, it gets people to focus and captures their attention, just as my props did. Adelia said she liked my Curious George and Gumby props. So if you have an idea, a light bulb pops up, right? So attention, comprehension, retention. Attention, if you use visual imagery and language, it'll help you to get people to focus. Comprehension, it helps people to understand. And retention, it helps people to remember. So that, in a nutshell, which is a metaphor, by the way, is a quick summary of just some of the key aspects of what visual thinking and visual leadership is all about.
I love that. And for all of our audience members, we have a link to TEDx talk by Todd on the power of visual leadership and visual thinking.
Thank you, Stas, for sharing that.
Yeah, in every channel you will see that link so that you can watch it and use the power of visual thinking. But remember, you don't need to draw. You can borrow props. You can create simple frameworks on a napkin. You can use stories. These are the tools of visual leadership that Todd just shared with you. And this is so important that we start incorporating it here and there in different places. And notice how much Todd is even illustrating that, right? So he brings visual props to you. You can have a prop around you when you are preparing for communication, and it can be something simple. It doesn't need to be fancy at all.
Yeah, just as one simple, I did a workshop recently on the impact of COVID on our lives. And just, if I hold this up to the screen, just think for a second, this little tiny invisible to the human eye thing, think about how this has changed the world, right? So I say to people as a metaphor, what are the little microscopic things in your life that are having a huge impact, right? So we can talk about COVID specifically, but metaphorically, what are those little things? It's like having that pebble in your shoe. What's that little thing that you don't even notice at first, but if you leave it there too long and you don't address the situation, it's going to get worse. So just, again, we can talk literally, but we can also talk metaphorically. And when you use the power of a visual image that other people can relate to, then it creates a connection. So a good metaphor will create connection and understanding. A poorly chosen metaphor that doesn't resonate with someone is going to cause more confusion. So we need to realize that across cultures, not every metaphor translates. So I use a lot of baseball metaphors and analogies because I'm a big baseball fan, But if I'm talking to someone from Europe, I might use soccer. If I'm talking to someone from Canada, I might use hockey, or someone from Australia or New Zealand, I might use rugby. So you want to speak the language of your audience and connect with them in some kind of common way that people will understand and relate to you. And that's how you help to form bonds, even across cultures and across language differences.
I think this is such a crucial point, that we have to meet people where they are, which brings us back to the first skill you mentioned, which is seeing things from people's perspective. The metaphor I'm using might be completely natural to me, and there's no question that everyone understands it, unless I take the time to look at the situation from the point of view of the audience. So all of these skills come together, and we have a feedback also from our one of the newest certified reinvention practitioners in India. Nafi says, attention, comprehension, and retention, beautiful. So there's a lot of appreciation for you here.
Thank you, Nafi. Thank you.
We are coming to the end of our chat, and I want, now that we have places to start and we are inspired by the idea of visual leadership and some basic tools we can start with, there's of course continuous practice. That's not a one-time event, and I hope everyone goes out and gets Todd's book and starts practicing with putting in a little bit of effort into it. But we are all in the middle of crisis, and it's hard to stay focused on something when we are disrupted. And right now, the crisis that is on every news in the Western Hemisphere, of course, is the Ukraine crisis. But whenever you're watching this episode, it might be 2 years from now, it's some new sort of crisis. The question I have for you is, what can we do as leaders of ourselves, and as leaders of people around us, whether it's our family members, our team members, our clients, our subordinates, our business partners, our colleagues in the company? What can we do in the middle of crisis? What's the role of leadership? What would be important to pay attention to or easy to forget when we're facing a particularly disruptive situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex issue and complex question. One thing that popped to mind as you were just talking is, again, seeing things through different lenses. We all, whatever the experience is, including the current crisis, we all experience things differently. The guy's name is Damien Barr. He's a writer. I forget where he's from. I think he's from the UK. But he said, a lot of times we say, oh, we're all in the same boat. But then he said, we're not all in the same boat. We may all be in the same storm, but in different boats. Some people have a yacht and other people have a sinking rowboat, right? So even though there's something going on in the world, we all experience it differently based on where we are, who we are, the resources we have at our disposal. So we have to realize that with empathy and compassion, just because something may not affect you in some way, it may affect someone else very differently. So for leaders in an organization, you may say, oh, what's the big deal coming into the office? Well, for someone who has a 2-hour commute, there is a big deal, right? Or has childcare issues or healthcare issues. So we need to have more empathy and compassion. So we need to open up. One of the visuals I use, I keep this prop on my desk. We need to open up our minds and create space to see things in different ways. If we keep our minds closed, then what we see and what we think right now is all we're going to have. So opening up our mind, I keep this on my desk to remind me, is am I creating the space in my life and in my mind to see things from other people's perspective? So from a leadership perspective, that's something we need to do. Also, the words hope and optimism keep coming to mind, is that even in the toughest of times, saying we will get through this together. This will pass. I took a workshop 20 years ago, actually it's almost 25 years ago now, with Phil Butler, who was the 8th longest held POW in Vietnam. He was shot down and held for 8 years in captivity. And I said to him, how did you get through that? And he said, one of his quotes that I love is that humor and optimism are the grease and glue of life. Without that, we never would have survived. So think about just humor and optimism. Optimism, you need to have hope. You need to think positively, even in the worst conditions. Hope that things will improve, things will get better, we will get through this. And then humor, even in the most serious, sad situations, can you find some seed of humor or joy or happiness or a smile? And as leaders, if you're a parent with a child, how do you help your child grasp and deal with the realities of what's going on right now? Because they see things very differently, just as your daughter did on the Venice trip. But also as leaders of organizations, it's our job to create a positive, hopeful, optimistic climate. One of the stories I tell in my book, one of the metaphors is called, what is your leadership weather report today? Are you a cloud of doom and gloom or a ray of sunshine who lights up the room, right? So as a leader, the weather that you cast on your people is going to reflect on them, right? So you can't change the weather outside, but we can change the climate in our teams or organizations. So that's something to think about as a leader. What's the climate? What's the weather report in terms of how you are coming across and how you show up every day with your people?
Thank you so much. I think these are very helpful reminders for all of us as we are thinking, okay, what's my direct sphere of influence and our own weather, which is the bubble of sanity and hope that we can create around our own team and our own sphere of influence becomes very, very important. And your words are resonating with Stas, who says, I love the metaphor. We are all in the same storm, but each of us has a different boat. And also Adelia says that she used to ride motorcycles and use that as an analogy until she realizes that for people who never ride, it's just not relevant. So a lot of appreciation for you here. So we have, of course, we will provide in the links information about the book. So for everyone who is watching the show, in the show notes, you will see links to the TEDx talk, to the book, and all other ways that you can find Todd. Todd, any last comments that you have for our audience?
Well, I was thinking about how this relates to reinvention and visual leadership. So there's a saying that things are invented twice, once in our minds and once out there in the world, right? So if we want to reinvent ourselves and reinvent the world, first we have to picture, what does that future look like? Who is our future self? And one of the chapters of my book is called, it's about your future self. Do things today that your future self will thank you for, and don't do things today that your future self will blame you for. So before you do anything, just think, before you put that, eat that whole Haagen-Dazs pint, say, is my future self going to thank me or blame me for what I'm about to do? So if we want to reinvent ourselves and reinvent a better future, these are just some of the things to think about, and using visual leadership will help us to see a better future and then to create a better future.
Absolutely. And of course, everyone who follows our work know that our latest book is pretty much a drawn handbook with a lot of artwork, with 9 visual tools, with business model reinvention cards at the end. We are big fans of visual leadership, and we believe that's the way forward. So we really appreciate you taking time to join us today. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
And there you have it, everyone. This is another episode. Of course, for those of you who would like to know more about Todd's work, we'll provide the links in the show notes. And for those of you who would like to download the 87-page preview of the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos, which would be a beautiful illustration of how do we visually illustrate some of the more complex topics, we will provide that link as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. As you can see from my energy, I'm not my natural upbeat self, but I do appreciate Todd's reminder to create a weather around me, to create a kind of state around me that can be a positive weather report for my team, for my family members, and for everyone who is affected by today's news, whatever the news might be. So for all of you, I appreciate you being here. Let me know in the comments what would be helpful for the next episodes, for the coming episodes. And if you have advice for potential guests, we always welcome them. Grab the resources, get Todd's book, watch the TEDx talk, grab the download of the handbook. All of those resources will be show notes. And please stay safe. Protect your inner self, and I will see you very, very soon. Thank you so much for joining.